Namaskar. Well, friends, I heartily welcome you all to Bhashya, my audio video podcast series on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. This audio video podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different facets of his multi-faceted, multi-dimensional genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the kind of grand vision that he had for our country as a nation. This is what this podcast is all about. In this episode, let's continue with our discussion of Dr. Ambedkar as a great warrior against the caste system. More specifically, in this episode, I'm going to talk about the response by Mahatma Gandhi to the book written by Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, his magnum opus of sorts, The Annihilation of Caste. So this talks about Mahatma Gandhi's response and rebuttal by Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. That makes it very interesting. Soon after the publication of Annihilation of Caste, Mahatma Gandhi responded by way of two articles. First was Dr. Ambedkar's Indictment, and the second one was Varn versus Caste. And both of them were published in Harijan, that was mouthpiece of Mahatma Gandhi. The first one was published on 18 July 1936, and the second one was published in August 15, 1936. Dr. Ambedkar, true Democrat that he was, published these two articles in the second edition of his Annihilation of Caste, and along with this criticism by Mahatma Gandhi, he also provided his rebuttal, and that was also printed in the second edition of the book. In the preface to the second edition, Dr. Ambedkar has said, and I quote him, "Besides Mr. Gandhi, many others have adversely criticized my views as expressed in my speech. But I have felt that in taking notice of such adverse comments, I should limit myself to Mr. Gandhi. This I have done not because what he has said is so weighty as to deserve a reply, but because to many a Hindu, he is an oracle, so great that when he opens his lips, it is expected that the argument must close and no dog shall bark. It is because of that reason that I have provided rebuttal to Mahatma Gandhi's criticism of my book." This reply to Mahatma goes on the following lines, and I'm reading directly from rebuttal or reply to Mahatma as given by Dr. Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar says, and I quote, "I appreciate greatly the honor done to me by Mahatma taking notice in his Harijan of the speech on caste which I had prepared for the Jat Pat Todak Mandal. From a perusal of his review of my speech, it is clear Mahatma completely dissents from the views that I have expressed on the subject of caste. Had my opponent been some mean and obscure person, I would not have pursued him. But my opponent being the Mahatma himself, I feel I must attempt to meet the case to the contrary, which he has sought to put forth." Dr. Ambedkar then goes on to say, and I quote again, "I must confess a sense of surprise on finding that of all the persons the Mahatma should accuse me of a desire to seek publicity, as he seems to do when he suggests that in publishing the undelivered speech, my object was to see that I was not forgotten. I have never hankered for publicity, and if I may say so, I have more of it than I wish or need. But supposing it was out of the motive of gaining publicity that I printed the speech, who could cast a stone at me? Surely not those who, like Mahatma, live in glass houses. Motive apart, what has the Mahatma to say on the question raised by me in the speech? First of all, anyone who reads my speech will realize that the Mahatma has entirely missed the issues raised by me, and that the issues that he has raised are not the issues that arise out of what he calls my indictment of the Hindus. The principal points which I have tried to make out in my speech may be catalogued as follows, and he provided a summary. He says, Dr. Ambedkar says, it will be noticed that the questions raised by Mahatma are absolutely besides the point and show that my main argument of the speech was lost on him. Let me explain the substance of the points made by Mahatma. The first point made by Mahatma is that the texts cited by me are not authentic. I confess I am no authority on this matter, but I should like to state that the texts cited by me are all taken from the writings of late Lokmanya Tilak, who recognized authority on the Sanskrit language and on the Hindu Shastras. His second point is that these Shastras should be interpreted not by the learned but by the saints, and that as the saints have understood them, the Shastras do not support caste and untouchability. As regards the first point, the masses do not make any distinction between the texts which are genuine and the texts which are interpolations. The masses do not know what the texts are. They are too illiterate to know the contents of the Shastras. They have believed what they have been told, and what they have been told is that Shastras do enjoin as a religious duty the observance of caste and untouchability. With regard to the saints, one must admit that howsoever different and elevating their teachings may have been, as compared to those of merely learned, they have been lamentably ineffective. They have been ineffective for two reasons. First, none of the saints ever attacked the caste system. On the contrary, they were staunch believers in the system of caste. Most of them lived and died as members of the caste which they respectively belonged. So passionately attached was Jnanadev to his status as a Brahmin that when the Brahmins of Paithan would not admit him to their fold, he moved heaven and earth to get his status back as a Brahmin recognized by the Brahmin fraternity. The saints have never, according to my study, they have never carried a campaign against the caste system or untouchability. They were not concerned with the struggle between the men. They were concerned with the relationship of men with the God. They did not preach that all men are equal. They preached that all men were equal in the eyes of God. A very different and a very innocuous proposition which nobody can find difficult to preach or dangerous to believe. The second reason why the teachings of the saints proved ineffective was that because the masses have been taught that a saint might break caste, but the common man must not. That the masses have remained staunch believers in caste and untouchability shows that the pious lives and the noble sermons of the saints have had no effect on their life and conduct as against the teachings of the Shastras. That masses hold a different view of the Shastras is a fact which should and must be reckoned with. How is that to be dealt with? Except by denouncing the authority of Shastra, which continue to govern their conduct, is a question that Mahatma has not answered. The third point made by the Mahatma is that religion professed by Chaitanya, Jnanadev, Tukaram, Tiruvalluvar, Ramakrishna Paramhans, etc., cannot be devoid of merit as is made out by me, and that a religion has to be judged not by its worst specimen, but by the best in it might have produced. I agree with every word of this statement, but I do not quite understand what the Mahatma wishes to prove thereby. The question still remains, why the worst number so many and the best so few? To my mind, there are two conceivable answers. First, that the worst, by reason of some original perversity of theirs, are morally uneducable and are therefore incapable of making the remotest approach to the religious ideal. Or, second, religious ideal is wholly wrong ideal which has given a wrong moral twist to the lives of so many, and that the best have become best in spite of the wrong ideal. In fact, by giving the wrong twist a turn in the right direction. Of these two explanations, I am not prepared to accept the first, and I am sure that Mahatma will also not insist upon the contrary. To my mind, the second one is the only logical explanation, unless the Mahatma has a third alternative to explain why the worst are so many and the best are so few. If the second one is the only explanation, then obviously the argument of the Mahatma that a religion should be judged by its best followers carries us nowhere except to pity the lot of many who have gone wrong because they have been made to worship wrong ideas. I have argued in my speech that a society based on Varna or caste is a society which is based on a wrong relationship. I had hoped that Mahatma would attempt to demolish this argument, but instead of doing that, he has merely reiterated his belief in Chaturvarnya without disclosing the ground on which it is based. One does not like to make personal references in an argument which is general in its application, but when one preaches a decline and holds it as a dogma, there is a curiosity to know how far he practices what he preaches. The Mahatma is a Baniya by birth. His ancestors had abandoned trading in favor of ministership which is a calling of the Brahmins. In his own life, before he became a Mahatma, when occasion came to him to choose his career, he preferred law to the scales. On abandoning law, he became half saint and half politician. He has never touched trading, which is his ancestral calling. His youngest son, I take one who is his faithful follower of his father. Born a Vaishya, has married a Brahmin's daughter and has chosen to serve a newspaper magnate. The Mahatma is not known to have condemned him for not following his ancestral callings. It may be wrong and uncharitable to judge an ideal by its worst specimens, but surely Mahatma as a specimen has no better. And if he even fails to realize the ideal, then the ideal must be an impossible ideal, quite opposed to the practical instincts of man. When When can a calling be deemed to have become ancestral callings so as to make it binding on a man? Must man follow his ancestral calling even if it does not suit his capacity, even when it has ceased to be profitable? Must a man live by his ancestral calling even if he finds it to be immoral? If everyone must pursue his or her ancestral calling, then it must follow that a man must continue to be a pimp because his grandfather was a pimp, and a woman must continue to be a prostitute because her grandmother was a prostitute. Is the Mahatma prepared to accept the logical conclusion of his doctrine? To me, his ideal of following one's ancestral calling is not only an impossible and impractical ideal, but it is also morally an indefensible ideal. Dr. Ambedkar goes on to say, and I quote him again, why does the Mahatma cling to the theory of everyone following his or her ancestral calling? He gives his reasons nowhere, but there must have been some reason, although he does not care to avow it. Years ago, writing on quote unquote caste versus class in his young India, he argued that the caste system was better than class system on the ground that the caste was the best possible adjustment for social stability. If that be the reason why the Mahatma clings to the theory of everyone following his or her ancestral calling, then he is clinging to a false view of social life. Everybody wants social stability, and some adjustment must be made in the relationship between individuals and classes in order that stability may be had. Stability is wanted, but not at the cost of change when change is imperative. Some might think that Mahatma has made much progress inasmuch as he now believes in Varna and does not believe in caste. It is true that there was a time when he condemned the cry for interdining, interdrinking, intermarrying, and argued that restraints about interdining to a great extent help the cultivation of willpower and conservation of certain social virtues. It is good that he has repudiated his sanctimonious nonsense and admitted that caste is harmful to both spiritual and natural growth. And maybe his son's marriage outside the caste has had something to do with this change of view. But Has the Mahatma really progressed? What is the nature of Varna for which the Mahatma stands? Is it the Vedic conception of commonly understood and preached by Swami Dayananda Saraswati and his followers, the Arya Samajists? The essence of Vedic conception of Varna is the pursuit of a calling which is appropriate to one's natural aptitude. Now, what is the difference between caste and Varna as understood by Mahatma? I find none. As defined by Mahatma, Varna becomes merely a different name for caste for a simple reason that it is the same in essence, namely pursuit of ancestral calling. Far from making progress, the Mahatma has suffered retrogression by putting this interpretation upon the Vedic conception of Varna. He has really made ridiculous what was sublime. Varna and caste are two very different concepts. Varna is based on the principle of each according to his worthwhile. Caste is based on the principle of each according to his birth. The two are as distinct as chalk is from cheese. I am sure that all his confusion is due to the fact that the Mahatma has no definite, clear conception as to what is Varna and what is caste, and as to the necessity of either for the conservation of Hinduism. The source of confusion is a double role which the Mahatma wants to play, of a Mahatma and of a politician. As a Mahatma, he may be trying to spiritualize politics. Whether he has succeeded in it or not, politics has certainly commercialized him. A politician must know that society cannot bear the whole truth and that he must not speak the whole truth. And if he is speaking the whole truth, it is bad for his politics. The reason why Mahatma is always supporting caste and Varna is because he is afraid that if he opposes them, he will lose his place in politics. Whatever may be the source of this confusion, the Mahatma must be told that he is deceiving himself and also deceiving the people by preaching caste under the name of Varna. Insofar as the Mahatma think, to me, he really appears to be prostituting his intelligence to find reasons for supporting his archaic social structure of the Hindus. He is the most influential apologist of it and therefore the worst enemy of the Hinduism. Well, friends, we can conclude this session here. But before I leave, let me remind you that if you like this audio video podcast series, please like it, share it, or subscribe to it. So long until we meet again real soon. Thank you. Namaskar.